Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martin. Now, during my time up here at Quebec City, I've had the opportunity to meet some incredibly interesting people. Our guest this week is someone I had the fortune to meet actually not long after I arrived in this amazing town. I'm really excited to have her on the podcast. Jackie Smith has been generating significant excitement in this city as the head of a relatively new party, Transition Québec, and as a candidate for mayor. Jackie, welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, before we get going talking about Transition Quebec or basically any kind of politics, I'd like to get your story, because I think it's a very interesting one, actually. So where are you from and how did you end up in Quebec City?
I am from Hamilton, Ontario, and I came to Quebec City originally for a wedding. And where I'm from, it's really industrial. And basically the city center for a long time was a bit of a wasteland, kind of boring sort of suburban residential areas. And when I came to Quebec City, I absolutely fell in love with it because, there's tons of culture, the language, felt like a lot of stuff was going on, but also it was walkable and dense and had a vibrant downtown and had a lot of green space. So I came back a year later and I've been here ever since.
That's awesome. Now, did you speak French before you got here?
In Canada, we have to take French up until grade 9. So I took it until 14 and then, but I always really loved French. So I took French right up until, as much French as I could. And then just before entering university, my French teacher said, you know what, you might as well give up because you're never going to speak French.
Really?
So, yeah. So I took that. I took her words of encouragement there. And when I moved here, I was sort of, I was still passionate about Quebec. I was still fascinated by it. And I was teaching English for 2 years as I learned French. And then I went to law school in French, which was a really sort of way of jumping into the deep end to learn French. It's been really interesting. And honestly, every day I learn something new. So it's a challenge to live in your second language. It's a challenge to run for city council or for mayor in your second language, but it's definitely worth it.
I can imagine. I'm having a tough enough time and I'm not running for anything. So no, that's all. I'm definitely not going to law school up here. No, I mean, that's a whole other very interesting topic for sure. But
yeah.
Obviously, first question that just about every candidate gets asked. So I don't know why I would change that. Why do you want to be mayor of Quebec and why are you the right person for the job?
Good question. Well, why I want to be mayor is I started this project. I ran for city council in 2017 and we didn't win, but I was also kind of discouraged by the fact that nobody was really willing to take strong stances. Nobody really saw the way that cities can have this transformational power and they're really, they're the level of government that's the closest to citizens and can really change your life.
Sure.
Everyone sort of had this attitude of just vote for me because I'm a good, competent person and didn't necessarily have a vision. And it was just a sort of a personality politics thing. So I got out of it because of that. And then I had a baby and just before I was pregnant, or while I was pregnant, the IPCC, which is the the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they released the report that we really, really need to change course because there's not going to be a future. So that was something that really struck me to the bone because I wasn't going to have this little baby and what have I done? I brought him into this world that has no future. So I decided to collaborate with this tiny little political party that had just started and say, guys, we got to make this very, very environmentally pro-environment and pro-social justice because that's what cities are going to win the war on climate change and nobody else is ready to do it. So it's going to be us. So that's how I got into it. And it's been a really interesting ride because we haven't had any expectations for
Sure.
this. The mayor who's in place right now has been basically unbeatable for the past 14 years. And we just said, we're going to go full throttle on this because we need climate action now and see what happens. And the response has just been overwhelming. So I think that people, why I think I would be the best is because I'm not a politician in the sense that I'm dying to see my face on a billboard or have power.
Sure.
I'm here for a specific goal. I'm here for they call it the ecological transition, the energy transition. And that's what we're here to do. And that's it. That's our mission.
Very, very cool. I like the message on local government. I've talked to a lot of people about that. For as much time as in America anyway, we spend following what's going on in Washington, D.C., what's happening in your city hall has probably got a lot more impact on your day-to-day than anything that's happening in Washington, D.C. It's a conversation I have with quite a few people. So that's an awesome
Honestly,
point.
it is because city governments, it's the roads that you drive on, the sidewalks you walk on, it's the water that you drink, the air that you breathe. Like it's nothing.
Who
It's
picks up your
directly with your
trash?
body.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But where
No,
it does get sort of, it does sometimes get technical, and that's where I think we might lose people, because it's not to say that there aren't, very vibrant debates on sidewalk planning,
Sure.
because there is.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
it's just you need to know about it. It's not just fun mudslinging as sometimes personality politics are.
Sure. Now, and I've noted from your bio, you got some work as on the business side, business analyst, business development. Can you talk about that background a little bit and kind of how that impacts your approach now going into the political realm?
Yeah, interesting question. So I did a degree in international development, and I worked in economic development as an economic development agent for an organic agricultural co-op, which was amazing experience. And
Sure.
and on the business development side, I think this is helping me run a city council for sure. And I also completely understand how small businesses need help and guidance and accompaniment, and also like they're driven, they're passionate. A lot of the small medium businesses, the person who's leading it is not making very much money.
Yeah.
They're working
Yeah.
a lot of hours, so I
Absolutely.
understand how overwhelming it can be. I also I'm a business analyst, a consultant, so I work with governments and also large businesses doing strategic planning, but also change management. So my change management experience is really helpful for, bringing on the ecological transition, because it's my job.
Sure.
I know that, from being in the sort of small business end, I know that business leaders, they want continuity, they want predictability, they want to know that their money, like they're going to get their money made.
For sure.
But with climate change, it's not. There's going to be so many unpredictable things, and we need to change now. But with the change management, I have to tell people the truth. Like, I go into governments or companies and say, listen, your business is failing. You need to change your plan radically.
Wow.
And this is how we're going to do it. And it's going to be okay. And everyone's going to be better for it. And it takes that courage to be able to come in to these, sort of cultures, these type business offices or cultures, and be like, we got to change it. It has to be now. I know you're not going to like it. We're going to get through it. We're resilient. We're smart. We're going to be okay.
Wow. Those are not easy conversations.
No, they're not. They're not. But I think, a lot of people are afraid to have those conversations.
Absolutely.
But that's my day-to-day job, because like I actually do believe in people. I think one of the things that COVID has shown us is that, like, our change isn't always like this incremental slow thing that everyone just sort of eases into. Sometimes the world changes overnight, and you know what? People adapt. They do.
Sure.
I mean, humans are the most resilient animals. We live on every single continent. We adapt to tons of different changes. It's not like, we're meant to do this, even though we don't like it. So I have a lot of faith in people.
No, this is interesting. So I definitely want to talk quite a bit actually about Transition Quebec, because I think the entire party is pretty interesting. So can you just give us kind of an overview? What does it look like? You talked about how it got started. Maybe what does it look like now? Do we have candidates all over the place? Do we have an office? Like what does it actually look like at present?
Yeah, so in Quebec City, you have the mayorship. You have 2 votes. You vote for the mayor and you vote for your city councillor or your ward. So there's 21 districts. So we have now 21 candidates plus me. We have our little election bureau here, so people can come in and talk to us and sign our petition. Nice. We have a petition against the third link. It's about a tunnel going under the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is
we'll definitely have to talk about that.
But yeah, I mean, we started off. I was elected by like 5 people, and now there's 700 members. We've raised way more money. We set out some fundraising goals to meet for November 7th, which I thought when we set them were wildly ambitious, and we've gone past that about 2 months ago. So it's there's a lot of momentum happening. There's a lot of people who are excited, and we're growing a lot. Like, it's blown my mind. This experience has just blown my mind.
That's awesome. Now, one thing you had mentioned, I wrote down because I think it's gonna create a double take for a lot of the Americans who are listening to the podcast, is that you said the election starts on Friday. Did I catch that correct?
That's right.
Because there's no starts on date for an election in the States. There's election day and you go and you vote. So what does it mean that election starts on Friday?
What it means is we can start putting up our signs. It means that the campaign has officially started. So we can put up our signs and we can start spending money for our campaign. So we can start advertising. And that's basically it. That means that the journalists are also they're officially on duty to cover the campaign. And it lasts 7 weeks. And
wow. So you couldn't put up a sign before this. You're not being covered by the press before this.
We have been covered by the press a little bit. But it's more official.
Wow.
Now. So
that's interesting. I wish it was only 7 weeks in the States. That would be amazing.
Yeah, the States is like in a constant election.
Pretty much. That's pretty much no, that is very, very cool. But obviously we talked a whole ton about the environmental side and how that was the big motivator for you to want to get involved. Maybe you can tell us, what is City Hall not doing now that you would do differently when it comes to the environmental side?
Well, first of all, we take it seriously.
Sure.
The biggest problem right now in Quebec City is, in terms of emissions, is transportation, individual transportation. So Quebec City is interesting because it has, it's actually a conglomeration of many smaller cities that were amalgamated into one city about 20 years ago. So it has a bunch of different downtowns or commercial areas. So and it's very, very spread out. It's not a very dense city. So you need a car. 2/3 of the city absolutely needs a car.
Sure.
However, 1/3 of the city you can get around by bus, bike, or foot, where you and I live, Jesse.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
It's this sort of like tale of two cities. There's this big divergency in it, but it's a question. So transportation is usually a very hot issue. The former administration announced a tramway system. Actually, it was a structuring transportation network, which was stripped down to tramway. So all the political parties are finally for this. There are certain things that we want to adjust, because what the city has basically done is, in order to not block traffic, they're going to cut down 200-year-old trees, 1,700.
Oh, wow.
200-year-old trees, and take out a lot of the existing trees in the city center, which is absurd. And it's usually just to make space so that it won't block traffic, where we actually want the tramway to be faster than going in a car. That's why people would take it and not
Sure.
take their car. So it's this sort of absurdity that the previous administration has decided. So that's a big issue.
Sure.
Another thing is I talked about the third link earlier. Quebec City is based on the St. Lawrence Seaway, and the southern, just facing the Seaway, is Lévis, which is it's like a suburb,
Yep.
very suburban town, and there's two bridges that link the two towns. Getting across the bridge, from Lévis to Quebec takes 25 minutes.
Which I find funny because the two bridges are right next to each other. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it takes about 25 minutes, and there's very right-wing radio that likes to spin the idea that 25 minutes is an absolutely outrageous time to be stuck in traffic. I know that you have to contextualize it. Maybe in New Hampshire, it's not that big of a deal, but anywhere like in Montreal, in my hometown city, which is the exact same size as Quebec City, it's nothing to drive an hour and a half to work is normal,
A lot of people in southern New Hampshire drive down to Boston every day. That's always over an hour. Absolutely.
It's people are totally outraged by it, and they are demanding that there be a third link. There actually is a third link. It's the ferry. There's a lovely ferry that goes from one downtown to the other downtown, but there's no transportation. There's no bus link on either side, so it doesn't. Right. You kind of can get there, but then what? So we would like to improve the public transit between the ferry, and the provincial government has been talking about making a third link, so a third bridge connecting the downtowns, but now it's turned into a tunnel, and it's going to be kind of the geology is really questionable because it'll be basically like a roller coaster. There's hills going up and down to go underneath the river, and it's going to cost $10 billion. So we're against that. The $10 billion is insane because it means it's going to potentially let people save 10 minutes. And we did the calculation. We could essentially buy every user a 5-bedroom house in Quebec City for the same amount of money.
Oh, wow.
Or give 150 years of free public transit for that money. So it's crazy. Or sure. Renovate basically every single infrastructure in the entire province, which needs it. So it's a big waste of money. And strangely, we're the only political party who's against it. The other thing that we want to do is offer free bus and free public transit for everybody. We've seen that there's 127 cities that have adopted this, and they've seen a lot of people in the first year sell their second car. Basically, the ridership has gone up 10-15% in the first year. So it's really interesting, and it's also helps a lot of people. Right now, we have an employment crisis because there aren't enough employees. Businesses are shutting down because they can't find workers.
Yeah.
So one of the things is people who want to work can't get to work because they don't have enough money to buy a car, and the bus is almost as expensive as having a car. It's a little less expensive, but it's tricky for people who are trying to get out of poverty. Another thing we want to do is increase public housing. And for all new builds, reserve 20% for public housing, and reserve new lots that come available for cooperatives, and also more housing projects. So that's some of the things we want to do. We're also talking about disarming the police.
Interesting.
It's interesting because Quebec City essentially has no crime.
That is unbelievable. If you look at because this city is relatively about the same size as Boston. If you compare the crime numbers, it's staggering.
Mm-hmm. No, it's there is crime, but violent crime is very low. It's mostly conjugal violence, which is still a problem.
Of course.
But the sort of question that we have here is there's conjugal violence, and there's a lot of most of the police the calls to 911 are about people having mental health crises.
Sure.
So the big question is, why are the police aren't, that's not their job. They're not
social
psychiatrists.
workers.
They're not.
Yeah.
So why they, these armed men and women coming and intervening? It's more of a question of getting, using the right tool, the right resources to solve the right issue. And also, strangely enough, because I've read a lot about disarming the police, and Quebec City police are actually named a lot as an excellent example for in a lot of handgun debates in the States, because there was the shooting at the mosque, which we've heard about. And also there's a second, I don't know how to say it. It was not a shooting, but it was like a mass murder with a man with a sword. And both of those people were stopped by the police without firing a shot, which is, they had their guns out, of course, but that was shown as being well, if the Quebec City police can take down these two maniacs without firing a gun, why do Americans need to be armed? Why do the American police need to be so highly armed? So, and the other thing that we're looking at is London, England does not have guns and never had, the police force has never had guns. And they've taken down 200 armed interventions without any guns. So it's a big, if London has been operating this since ever, why is Quebec City, that has no crime, why can't we do it? So that's another thing we're looking at. And we have a lot of things.
Yeah,
Jesse.
no,
what else do you find interesting?
No, I do. I think I want to talk on this for a bit, because first, going back to the whole ferry topic, I want to come back to guns, because I find the guns topic very interesting, because it's very different than what I'm used to, for sure. One thing that first of all, the ferry is amazing. People who have the Patreon subscription know I post videos of me just taking the ferry back and forth for fun, because I like taking the ferry. But there's, from what I understand, and maybe you can correct me, because I've had some fellow students from the same program I'm in who live in Lévis and say that there's no link in the public transportations between Lévis and Quebec. So you literally have to buy two separate bus passes, which apparently is a major pain if that's what you would like to do. And so people drive because it's a pain.
Oh, for sure.
Gotcha.
That's sort of the other idea with a free bus, is that we looked at the budget, and about $7 million goes to actually collecting fares in the budget. So if we'd say $7 million right off the bat, and it would help people from Lévis. They just get off the Lévis bus and they just get on the Quebec City bus, and it's no big deal.
Gotcha. And now, for what this third link, this troisième ligne, now where would it draw people off? Where would this surface when it got into Quebec?
It's insane. The plans the plans they make don't actually, that they're proposing, don't quite make sense, because they say that there's going to be an exchanger where people can park under the National Assembly and then take the tram line. But that would mean they would need to have a massive underground parking.
For sure.
Which would mean they would need to dig under basically all of the downtown, which is insane. So that goes against logic. We don't know. They say there's also going to be another exchange pool in Saint Roch, which is sort of the Quebec City has two has an escarpment, a very high escarpment. So there's one uptown and one really downtown.
Yeah.
So it's really
upper and lower. Yes.
Yeah, and then it's going to come out sort of on the northern part of, sort of closer to where I live in Limoilou, and right beside an already very a neighborhood venue, which is quite poor and marginalized. So it's going to obviously create terrible air quality, which is already an issue in these neighborhoods. So it's It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I've driven through that area quite a bit. Quite a bit of students, again from the program, who have given them rides home and stuff. And I don't know if that area is set up to accommodate tons and tons and tons of new traffic.
No.
Haven't driven through that. But okay.
No, it would be essentially destroying neighborhoods. And that happened in the 70s. I think that happened in the 70s. It might still be happening everywhere. But in the 70s, the provincial government took out the Chinese neighborhood and the Jewish neighborhood, like actually just like bulldozed it and put a highway through. So there's no longer like really a Chinese community in Quebec City or a Jewish community because their neighborhood was completely destroyed.
Wow, that's brutal. Okay, but I do need to get back to guns though.
Yes.
So I do think this is pretty fascinating because I did a semester when I was in law school in Ireland, and I remember talking to, there was police officers, the Garda as they called them over there, who did not have guns, and that was my first exposure to that could possibly be a reality. And I guess their answer for when there's pretty like drastic situations is almost like there's SWAT teams in the States. There's special armed units in big towns in Ireland for should something be necessary. They're specifically trained to handle that. But if it's not necessary, then the normal police don't have. Is that kind of what you're envisioning?
Well, exactly. That doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there's no arms ever. It just means that the patrol officers don't have it on the person. So they don't get trigger happy. If there's a gun in your car, that's fine. If it's got to that point. So it's not, having a gun is just an extra level of intensity of militarization against citizens. And I think that I don't want people are starting to paint me as like the anti-cop person. I kind of actually have the personality of a cop. A lot of people call my husband used to call me the sheriff. But anyways, I worked with police officers. I worked at the criminal court, and I actually wanted to be a police officer. I applied to be a RCMP officer at one point when law school was not going very well. And I don't know, and I know lots of cops, and I like lots of cops. And from everybody in the emergency services, there's not a lot of people who are in it to just get a gun. They're there because they want to help. They want to help people who are in a situation of crisis. They have, like, the best cops I know have this total soothing energy. My high school boyfriend, his uncle was the assistant chief of police, and I had a really anxious dog, like a really crazy anxious little yappy dog that would bite everybody. Okay. And he would come into the room and the dog would just like chill out and like snuggle up with them because he just had this calming presence. And I think that's what policing is about, is coming in being like, hey, what's going on here? Like that's what good cops are.
Yeah, I think so I think this is going to get a big reaction because it's going to be brand new. I think the idea for a lot of my listeners from police to not have guns. I would definitely suggest people look into the very first thing that you had mentioned, which is the crime numbers here in this town, because this is not what we're used to in the States. I can tell you firsthand, I have never once in the time I've been here walked down a street and felt nervous or uncomfortable ever, not one time. And I think most of us have places, even in our hometowns, where we would not want to be at a certain hour of the evening for fear of safety, but that's just not a reality here. This is a different place.
You're right. And you know what, Jesse, like that's a good point to put in, because I remember like as a woman, like all my life if you're walking down a busy street, I get harassed like constantly.
Yeah.
And that was just something that's like, it's awful, but it happens. And I remember, my mother was actually sick, and I went back to Hamilton and after living here for so many years and was working in a law firm, and I was wearing a suit and I had like a briefcase, and I was standing outside my law firm waiting for my boyfriend to pick me up. And I was getting like catcalled, and like people were calling me a prostitute. And I was like, I'm wearing a suit outside the law firm.
Right. Yeah.
What do you think I'm doing? And I was oh yeah, like everywhere else in the world, women get harassed on the street. That doesn't happen in Quebec City. And like somebody pulled up beside me in a car the other day and said, "Hello, madame." And I was like, what's going on? Like, who is, and I looked over and it was one of my candidates. And he's like, "Hey, do you want to ride?"
That's awesome. Yeah. This
So,
is just a different place for sure.
yeah.
Now, and you mentioned social justice.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess what social justice initiatives would you like to see in place?
Well, the bus is part of it. The
This
free
is the
bus.
big one. Yeah. Okay.
That's a big one. It's one of these things that it's, oh, what do you call it? In French we say un pierre deux coups. It's like un pierre cinq coups. Like it'll go far. It meets a lot of targets. And social housing, we spoke about that.
Sure.
Also, there's things that are about like environmental racism that we want to stop. In Limoilou, in sort of northern Limoilou, there's the biggest immigrant population and the poorest population in the city. And that is where the incinerator is. That is where the port is, the Port of Quebec, which has had problems controlling its nickel and I think it's iron oxide, it's red dust.
Wow.
So it's the most polluted area and the most marginalized and the most racialized area. So there's another mega project that we stopped. There's another one that's coming into that. It's called the ZIL. It's the Zone Invasion de Littoral Est. And citizens actually want that area. It's 15 municipal lots that they're going to basically create for like high-tech industries and make an industrial park. And we want to change it into a green space and give access to the fleuve, the seaway, so people can actually go swim and have a beach and enjoy nature in that neighborhood, and also improve air quality. So that's another big part of our social justice plan, as well as with the policing. We want to start investing a lot more in the community sector to help people have mental health issues, and
Sure.
potentially create a partnership between the police and mental health and something else workers.
Like providers. Yeah.
There's already a project like that. It's just there aren't enough on the mental health worker end people available or funding. So we want to increase that funding.
Makes sense to me. Now, there's a couple of topics that I know if I don't bring up, people are going to ask me why I didn't. So here
Okay.
it goes. Here goes, listeners. First of all, what role do you think the municipal government has in promoting language and culture? And how would you say the current municipal government is doing?
I think that one of the things that the mayor did here, which was really good, was he called himself like the festival mayor, and he put Quebec City on the map in a lot of ways for, I think, the international artistic community, because there's Festival d'été, like summer festival, which was just like sort of like a very, very local summer music festival for a long time. He brought in Sting, he brought in Celine Dion's already Quebecer, but
it's huge.
Metallica,
yeah.
Lots of big names. And the tickets are not free. I mean, it used to be $20. Now they're, I think, $120, but it's still fairly accessible for everybody to go see these sort of big international names.
You should see the list of people before that has come. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Just see the lineup every year. It's nuts.
It's sort of, that's fun. That's amazing. He's also done quite well in promoting, smaller music festivals and art festivals. But I think in terms of language, one of the things that I find strange about the way that Quebecers learn French and language, because we actually do have a problem here in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, with functional illiteracy. Like 60% of people are functionally illiterate, which means they can read, but if they read a paragraph, they don't necessarily understand what the first line has to do with the last in a paragraph. So that's what it means. And I think everybody in this podcast probably has a little bit of French with them. So I think there's something in the way that like we teach French here, where it's very like this utilitarian, like grammar. and there's no appreciation of the beauty of it. I think in at least in my studies, like English courses were all about literature and poetry and plays, and making a language has to live. It has to, you have to appreciate it for all of its color, all of its diversity, all of its kind of like regionalisms. So I think that through libraries, we need to get them a lot more animated and a lot more like, culturally cranked and appropriate, and not just for books, but actually have a lot of different sort of activities and making reading fun and making language alive. I think that's something that we could do a lot. I think another thing that it would make it that we want to do with our libraries is to put into place more diversity of French across across North America and the world, la francophonie, as we say. Saying this is because we talk a lot about Quebec, and that's great, but also Quebec City is actually we call ourselves l'accent de l'Amérique, and we are the French-speaking capital of North America. We are. There was a program that started by the former administration to help French communities across North America revitalize their French. Cajuns, Cadians, all like, Jesse, like your parents, from the Great Exodus, going around and being like, hey, let's try to revitalize these communities as French-speaking communities. They cut that funding, which is really too bad, which is something we want to reverse. Another thing that we would want to do is we want to make, like, our administration, this isn't forcibly like within the municipal tool appareil, not necessarily with the government, but as a politician, as my own mandate, I want to make Quebec City the place for all Francophiles. I want people just like you, Jesse, like, come here, come live in Old Quebec, come like get submersed in French, and bathe in it. Figure out what are the links between your community and this community. I would like to invest in finding ways to revitalize lost French in French communities, because nobody else is going to do it if we don't do it in Quebec City. We need to like bring people together from all over the Americas and say like, okay, so what happened in St. Louis? How's that going? Okay, Manitoba, like, what are you doing? And did this work? Did that not work? What are the blockages? So it would be really, one of our things that we want to do is really, instead of having like mass tourism with cruise ships coming in, we really want every single North American university French department to have Quebec City on the map, to send your French students here and fall in love, and bring your richness about your communities and your culture and your literature and your history, bring it here, and let's talk, and let's revitalize French in North America.
Yeah, no, it's great. That was actually the topic I was going to get to wind down the conversation. So I think that's cool. I think that's cool that you got to it now, because I do think this city has a unique place in the hearts of everybody who can trace ancestry back to New France. Anyway,
absolutely,
this is a very unique place, and some of the things that we've been talking about back home, I would love to be able to somehow be able to fund 18-year-olds to have the opportunity that I had. Spend 6 months in Quebec City. You are going to return with a different viewpoint on life than you did before you arrived here. No, I think that'd be amazing if we can find a way to work together. And there are definitely groups trying to do that now, for sure. There's definitely groups trying to connect the various pockets of Francos all over the North America. But I think it would be great if we had some actual government supports in this city. That would be tremendous. That would be super helpful.
I think that's the thing that, the last government, how can I say this? It's interesting because he's the past, he sort of like spoke for a generation where Quebecers always felt like the underdog, like they're not important. Their culture is inferior to like English North American culture. And it's trying to be like, hey, we're important, we're on the map. Look, we have like these, English, the big shots coming here, and that's a big deal, right? Which is great. And I think we've done that. We're over that. But I think what we don't realize is how in Quebec City is like how important we are and how unique we are and how many things we actually get right. And, we have a special role to play in North America, and we need to like embrace it, and we need to, get that going, make the connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you're going to have a tough time convincing anybody listening to this podcast of the importance of this city, for sure. No, that's awesome. Glad to hear that. But all right, the question that I definitely had to get to before we get allowed to wind down, because going through, Transition Quebec's webpage, which is really well done, actually, it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
I noticed a couple of times that the words independence in Quebec are in the same sentence. And you're obviously always going to get attention in this town when you put those two words in the same sentence. So where are you guys coming from on that question?
Yeah, this party was actually, before it was Transition Québec, it was called Option Nationale, which was a political party, an independent, like a small political party at the provincial level that was very independentist,
Sure.
independence party. And their platform was independence before anything else. When I first came in here as leader, I was like, guys, what does that have to do? What does city politics have to do with independence? I don't get it. And where it really comes down to is in Quebec City is a historical city. It's one of the oldest cities in Canada. In North America, it's 414 years old, and maybe 13 years old. Essentially, the federal government is all over the place. It controls a huge amount of the territory. It's the port. It's the giant national parks. It's a lot. Most of like an old Quebec, and there's two functional military bases here. So what that means is, in terms of the Port of Quebec, which has had, I mentioned earlier, it has a lot of problems with being a good environmental steward. It's not.
Sure.
It's very polluting. It's been basically, one of the things we found is like it's been polluting the neighborhood where I live for 40 years. It's, there are environmental norms that it's just been blowing past for many, many years, for decades. And total impunity. And there's been lawsuits, there's been various different governments that have tried to get into to do something, but it's kind of like a principality. It's a corporation, and it's under federal government, and we can't really do anything about it. So that's where we came in with the independence, where the last leader, he was like, if we're independent, then we can have the port, which I thought was like, okay. it's kind of like shooting, using a bazooka to shoot a fly, but
you definitely will.
But what I actually found was with another formal, very like hardcore independentist who's a former MP, and he started the law on ports of Quebec, is that they can actually be turned over to the municipality if we wanted to. So that's part of our platform, is to take over the Port of Quebec. And also, in terms of independence, having the ability to use federal lands, parks, and green spaces for the actual residents, and not just have them managed by this sort of federal government that nobody can actually access or talk to. Like if you want to organize a festival, you really, there's no one to call. There's no one to like, hey, we want to reserve picnics in these national parks. This doesn't happen. So we want to give that sort of access back to citizens.
Very, very cool. What I'm hoping too is one day we get a situation similar again to my time in Ireland, where they have the heritage citizenship. That's like my dream. Where if you have a grandparent born in Ireland, you can become a citizen of Ireland. That's one of the rules they have in Ireland. And there's a ton of people who left during that 100-year period whose families would fall in the same situation that I'm in right now. There's 2 million of us just in New England who I think quite a few of us would qualify under that, something like that. That's my goal.
That would be really interesting. I'm going to float that by some people. I hadn't thought about that. That would be amazing.
Yeah, my grandfather's both born in Saint Apollinaire, so I'd be in for sure. Now, I guess I have to ask you the independent question. Probably this is the question I get asked most. I get some decent amount of email. I get asked all the time if, from my time up here, if I think the independent movement is dead.
No.
So I'm curious to see what your take on that question is, because I get it a lot.
It's definitely not dead. It's definitely not dead. I think it's changed. I think the nature of it has changed a lot. There's not one, back in the 60s when everybody was decolonizing, there was one party, it was Le Parti Québécois with René
Sure.
Lévesque, who started the independence movement. And since then, there's the Parti Québécois that used to be also very left-wing and progressive, that made tons of gains. In the 90s, there's the Bloc Québécois, which was like the federal level, which
Sure.
was founded. So it's basically, the federal party saying, we represent Quebec and don't mess with us. Because to not split the vote of other political parties. So that was, the last federal election, everybody thought the Bloc was dead, and it made a roaring comeback. So there's that. I think also with the independence movement, it drove a lot of people to feel like, hey, we need to be something. We can't just be this little underdog of English Canada anymore. So I think that drove a lot of industry, a lot of business, a lot of people could actually have like a good government job in French and go really far. But I think, at least on the private sector side, I think, you kind of a lot of people came to a certain point and said, yeah, we can't, we still need to learn English. We as much as we want to be proud and we want to be independent, we're still this French island in this English ocean. And, if China's learning English, we should probably learn English too. So I think there was that sort of conscious prise de conscience that happened in the independence movement, which sort of petered out the last decade or so. But it was really with Stephen Harper who really started to change Canada. He's Albertan. He was the one who pulled Canada out of the Kyoto agreements. He's the one that really developed the oil sands, everything about the environment, everything about Native rights. He just absolutely demolished. These omnibus bills were just completely gutted. Like any type of environmental protection. He's kind of like in that sense, in some ways he was like a Trump, but he wasn't like overtly awful. I'm sorry, there's like a lot of Trump people, but he wasn't mean. He wasn't like where Trump was impulsive. Stephen Harper was like a robot and just very cold and methodical. So a lot of people in Quebec that is, and me as well, that put fuel to the fire for the independence movement, where the new discourse became anti-colonial and sortir de l'état pétro-canadien, so like get out of the oil state of Canada and block pipelines and have sovereignty over our territory and protect the environment. So it was sort of that really got things going. And then there's been another debate about the hijab in Quebec, which has split the sovereigntist movement in two. There's it's sort of a generational thing. There's baby boomers who went through a lot of religious oppression, who just see it as total religious repression.
Can you explain what that is for those who may not
a hijab?
be aware?
Hijab is essentially
the political discussion over it.
So basically, in France, the right wing the far right with Marine Le Pen and whatnot, has legislated that women cannot wear veils, a hijab, for if you're Muslim, women can't wear veils. That debate raged here for a while. And in France, it's in public, it's everywhere. There is it started with the Charte des valeurs québécoises, where it basically said you can't wear if you're going to wear a hijab, you can't wear it as being a teacher, a police officer, in any type of powerful position. So if you're like a director in the fonction publique, so any, like you basically can't wear it if you're going to work for the government, that, or any type of religious symbol. So that raged and went back and forth for a long time. I feel like it's been 10 years. And then just recently, the CAC, which is the provincial government, legislated that you can't be if you're a teacher, a police officer, a judge, a prison guard, you can't wear a hijab. That's made a big exodus of Quebecers who Islam Muslim Quebecers since it's come through. But there's been a lot of questions around feminism, around racism, around institutional racism within the independence movement. So it's splintered through that.
Now, would that apply to other religious symbols as well? Like if I was teaching, could I walk in with a giant cross around my neck, or is that also no good?
I don't think so.
Basically, any kind of religious symbol.
Yeah, but I think I think it's talk about it because, I mean, you can hide the cross.
Of course. No, this is cool. This has been a way fun conversation. I appreciate the time very, very much. Talking to Jackie Smith, candidate for mayor here in Quebec City. Now, as we wind down, I just got to know, what does success look like for Transition Quebec in this upcoming election? What are the goals?
I mean, the dream is to have, total power, get elected with a huge majority, and great. I mean, like everybody, but our goals are to essentially, and I know this might sound really soft, but like just do our best. We're all part-time. Well, I mean, the next couple of weeks, a couple of us are going to be full-time, but sure. We're new. Our adversaries are a hell of a lot stronger and well-financed than we are.
Right.
We're doing this to change the world. So we want to change the world.
And I think one thing you have done a really good job of is maybe starting to change the conversation, which I think is cool.
And I think that's another thing where we differ is we're not afraid to tell the truth. We're not afraid to get people upset. We're not afraid to challenge the status quo. And I'm getting ready for the Chamber of Commerce debates and thinking about how, what am I going to say to them? Because I'm a business person on one hand, and I get it, but I'm also an environmentalist and a terrified mother on the other hand. Right. And saying like, how can I, if I was going to be strictly electoralist, I don't think, the Chamber of Commerce anybody's going to vote for me. And my counselors are like, doesn't really matter. None of these people are going to vote for us anyway. Yeah. But I think it's an opportunity to really challenge people on the status quo about the environment, about social justice, and how we can make a better world. So I think we're all taking this as an opportunity for change.
That's awesome. I gotta say, one true story of kind of what it occurred to me that you guys were having an impact here is I was walking down the street with a couple of friends of mine, and we're just going through a neighborhood, and all of a sudden we see this pretty big crowd and a bunch of TV cameras, and we're just about to continue walking by, and I go to tell one of my friends, I'm like, let's go check out and see what all this excitement is over here. I'm just curious to see what's going on. And I show up, and it was you talking about the third link in front of a very good sized crowd and a whole bunch of TV cameras. So I thought that was awesome. I thought that was very, very cool.
That was a great day. And yeah, one of the other things, just sort of like for women in politics, I have not been like Adrian, my son, has been with me the whole time. Literally, like when I was breastfeeding and I was like yelling at, the nickel industry, being like, "Why are you poisoning my children?" Like in these meetings, and he's had this sort of huge political experience in his 2 years of life, and that day for the third link that my husband was he had left to go get something else that we forgot, and the TV cameras showed up and they were interviewing me, and Adrian was standing there holding my hand, and I just sort of thought, yeah, my mother was never like in front of a scrum of journalists holding my, I was never in front of like a tube,
Sure.
and he's just going to be like, this is what moms do.
That's his normal. Yeah. No, that's awesome. This is very, very cool. Now, if people want information on your campaign or on the party in general, where should we send?
And listen, if people want to become members, you can become a member, and you don't have to be a resident of the city of Quebec. You can live anywhere in the world.
And how does that happen?
You can go to our website, which is transitionqc.org, and click on, I think it's S'impliquer, and then devenir membre.
Very cool. And we could definitely put direct links to that too. Yeah. And like link that. Well, Jackie, I appreciate the time. Thank you very much. This is cool.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Take care.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.